And the stars, it was like a carpet of stars from one end of the desert to the other. And we would sit out on the porch with Uncle Bob, and he would tell us the names of all the constellations.
This is the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, 30-minute conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 163. Find out more about the podcast at desertladydiaries.com or engage with guests, listeners, and me on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries. Ann Lear is an artist and retired teacher. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, making frequent trips to visit her uncle Bob Lear, a 29 Palms homesteader in the 1930s. After many years of a teaching career in parochial and public education, she returned to her first love, 29 Palms and Indian Cove, where she has spent the last 25 years painting and enjoying the beauty of the desert. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to tell my story, because I had to do some research to try and remember some of the things that had happened. I had really forgotten about them, so I appreciate this. Well, first of all, I was born in Los Angeles in 1930. 91 years ago. But it's important for me to talk about my uncle first, because he's responsible for us coming out here. Mm-hmm. During the First World War, he had a lung disease, and so Dr. Lucky sent him and 4 or 5 other veterans out, and he came to this area with Joe Stalter. There were just the 2 of them in this whole area here. And lucky for him, he ended up in Indian Cove. But anyway, he was allowed 160 acres, according to the Homestead Act, as long as he put a little building on it, or 2 of them as it happened. So he started building his house over there on the corner, which is still standing there, in 1932. And then later he built this house with my father and my brother. And this house you're in pretty good shape,
yeah, it's beautiful,
was the second building, and that was built in 1935.
So for folks listening, just give them the location of the original house and what they see today.
That would be on the corner of Lear and what is now the highway. The highway didn't always come that close. It was about 100 feet, I believe, beyond the house. And maybe I could take a moment to say something about Lear Avenue.
Sure.
County wanted a road for the people who were living way out in the boondocks. And so he donated part of his land to them on the condition that he could name it. But because he was alive, he couldn't name it after himself. So he named it after his father, which is this gentleman here, my grandfather.
Okay.
So this picture, I probably was about 9 or 10 years old here.
Oh, my goodness.
And this is taken from that house, the porch of the first house. And that's my cousin. And I put a picture of what this house looked like. Nothing around it.
Right.
At that time. And this is the highway.
Oh, my goodness.
Highway 62. My father used to bring us out, the whole family out, to visit Uncle Bob several times a year. And the days, as I remember as a little child, were not very interesting. I would find Joe Stalter's son, who was about my age, and we would go looking for rocks. That was the big, the big excitement. But the nights were different. They were the most beautiful. It's hard to imagine. The sky was so bright and clear, and the stars, there was like a carpet of stars from one end of the desert to the other. And we would sit out on the porch with Uncle Bob, and he would tell us the names of all the constellations and the stars, and I thought he knew everything about the nightlife. Anyway. And sometimes people ask, like, where did you get your inspiration to be an artist? And I have to give credit to my mother, who was a teacher, but she was also an artist in between times. She would bribe me. This is really how I got my interest in art. Whenever I did anything good or I finished my homework, she would give me a piece of art equipment. So I'd have a set of watercolors or pencils and so on. And then also I have to give credit to my first grade teacher, who was in a Catholic school. She used to hold up our artwork. I remember to this day that kind of encouraged me to be an artist.
Nice.
And then after I graduated from high school, I entered the Sisters of the Presentation teaching order in San Francisco. That's where I received my first degree from the University of San Francisco, and taught first grade, second grade, fourth, fifth, and then years later I ended up teaching in high school. I taught biology and art.
What was your favorite grade to teach?
Thank you for asking that one, because the first grade was really a delight. I was always interested in teaching art more than anything else. But as children get older, they become conscious that other people are watching them, and they're self-conscious. But first graders don't know about that, and so they would just paint away. It was so much fun to talk to them and find out why did they do this. So I enjoyed first grade very much, but however, I've enjoyed every single level that I've ever taught on. I love the kids. Then my education as a teacher in preparation for those classes, I went to Immaculate Heart College in Los Angeles. I went 2 summers, and I had the opportunity to have Sister Mary Corrita, another name which you may not have heard, but she was very famous at that time.
Oh, really? Why?
She had something to do with the Vietnamese War. You know, she was very interested in that, and she kind of became famous with her serigraphy, her silk screening that she did. And even now they have a museum in her name, and I'm sorry I don't know exactly where it is, but yeah, she still has followers. But she's the one who introduced us to collaging. At the time I didn't really appreciate gluing papers down, but it turned out that that's really my love. So you can see around the room I still do collaging, and I love teaching it. That's 1 degree, and then I have a degree from the University of San Francisco, and later I got a master's degree in art from Notre Dame University.
Wow.
So while teaching in high school, I've dug back into the researched. I illustrated a series of books that we used in the high school called the Family Living series. And this is one of the old workbooks. This was a sophomore book. It had a lot of biology in it, so I did the scientific drawings for this one.
Oh, wow.
And also the physiology book, which was the senior year. So this was during the 1960s. Don't think it's used anywhere now. And anyway, I have that as a relic. And then I also worked on 2 large projects while I was during those 8 years that I taught in high school. This one is a 14-foot mosaic, which we broke up into 2 parts, a 6-foot and an 8-foot section, all mosaic, except that I did something a little different. I drew on top of the mosaic with black acrylic paint.
Oh, wow.
To do some of the final details. And this picture shows it being shown at the California State Fair.
Wow.
That was the summer that they were finished. And then after that, they were placed in the entryway of the Sisters' Convent in San Francisco, which is about a block down from the University of San Francisco. And as far as I know, it might still be there. I don't know. I haven't been there since 1980.
Oh.
So that's one. And then the second large project, I hand carved
Wow.
14 Stations of the Cross. This is a large image of
How tall are those?
Now they're 16 inches high, and they were 12 inches wide and 3 inches thick.
And carved from?
Sugar pine, which is very, very soft, easy to work on. And those were placed in this chapel, which was in Los Gatos at the time. They had an earthquake after several years, and they decided not to use that building as a chapel. So then they gave those stations to the Trappist monastery, which is in Vina, California.
Oh, okay.
And one of the ladies that works with me, Sandy, she did a little research 2 years ago, and she discovered that Trappists were building this residence for their retired Trappists. And apparently that's where they intend to put these stations.
They will live on.
I hope
awesome.
so. Inspire prayer, I hope.
That's great.
But that will be a private chapel. So
Lovely.
anyway. Then in 1968, I left the convent. That was after 18 years. And my life took a new direction. And so I applied for teaching in public school, which was going to be quite a difference. And so I got a job teaching at Kranz Junior High School, that's the county of Los Angeles. And I was there for 25 years.
Wow.
Yes, can you imagine just teaching art all day long to 7th and 8th graders? It was a wonderful job. And I used to say to myself, as I drove to school in the morning, I'd say, they're paying me to do this job when I would volunteer for it.
Right. Those are the best quote-unquote jobs in the world, right?
Yes. It was a great job. And I met so many wonderful youngsters there, and I'm still in touch with some of them, Dr. Nambo and Jean Tron. We still keep in touch.
Nice.
But there was one special event that happened during those years. Kind of nice when a teacher, even if it's only one outstanding student in your whole career. I think this gentleman was it. Nick Ha was Vietnamese, and he built this model of the Forbidden Palace, Chinese Forbidden Palace, all with Q-tips.
Oh my goodness.
So when you look at it, all of the doors and the windows, everything were parts of Q-tips, and he even curved the edges of the roof.
Yeah.
It was an exquisite piece of work. Well, at that time, the Chesbrough Ponds Company used to offer a contest in the whole United States, and they gave wonderful prizes for anything made of Q-tips.
Oh, wow.
So we entered his work, and he won the national prize, the first place. So, and I'm mentioning it because his parents weren't able to take part in the final award, and I got to be the chaperone, which was a great privilege. But one of the prizes was a week's stay in New York at the Waldorf Astoria.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
I'm a former East Coaster, so I know.
He had a room that you could fit this whole house in. It was wonderful. And he made a list of anything that he wanted to do during that week. I just picked two things out. The first thing was the Statue of Liberty, of course. He climbed to the top of the Statue of Liberty. I made it to about 3 stories below. I couldn't quite make it to the top.
That was probably when you could still go into the torch.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he was way up there. We took pictures, or he took pictures from the top. And that was a great inspiration because I had never seen the Statue of Liberty, and I probably never would have gone.
Right.
And then the second wonderful thing that happened to him, he was the guest of the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the day, and they gave us 2 docents.
Oh, wow.
And he was allowed to go anywhere inside of the Metropolitan. I didn't realize at the time they close one half of the museum in the morning, and then because it's so large, and then they open that up in the afternoon and close the other part. But he was allowed to go through all of the areas. So we started out with the Egyptian art, and he went through the Impressionist section. Oh, it was delightful.
It's a great museum.
And then later that year, I didn't win the Bravo Award, but I was nominated for the Bravo Award, which is given to art teachers at the Los Angeles Music Center. So that was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
So I think I got more than I gave to those kids.
Oh, I don't know. There's probably some that didn't necessarily reach out to you personally, but I'm sure that you always appreciate those teachers that are so encouraging. And I think about what you said about the first grade teacher who would show your work and how that encouraged you. So
well, when we come up to the 7th and 8th grade, I have to say that the students would come back years later and they would say that it was such an important time in their lives. Art may not have been the most important subject in their lives, but it's a formative time, and people don't realize that they make their judgments at that time, and they also often decide on their careers in life.
Yeah.
During those times, I still came out here and visited, on weekends and painted. And then in 1993, after 43 years of teaching,
Wow.
which is a job I enjoyed very much. I loved it all my life, and I hated to stop, but
Right.
I had gotten a little too old. And I had to make up my mind where to spend my life. And of course, I had come here as a child. I came during my teenage years, and then I returned very much after 1970. I came on weekends, and so I thought, like, where else could I go where there was a prepared studio like this little house that's here?
Yeah.
And so I finally decided that this was going to be it.
Right.
So then for the past 25 years, I've been here painting and, as you can see,
Yes.
doing work.
Yeah. Was your uncle still alive when you moved out here?
Yes, he died around 1978, I think it was.
Okay.
Yes, that was sad. So for 1 year, I didn't come out. I couldn't bear to look down there. His house, his original house is that one down at the end of the corner.
Okay.
And then later he moved up. Actually, it's the other way around. He moved from that place because the highway
On
was
Lear
so
and
close to
62,
it,
right.
and moved farther down here.
Yeah.
I took part in the first 2 years of the open studio when Chuck Kaplinger and Audrey Gillick, I believe, were the two that first started that.
Okay.
After 2 years, I decided, well, I was missing out on seeing everybody else's work, so I stopped for many years. But in the last 3 years, thanks to the two ladies that I'll tell you about in a minute, they got me interested again in touring, so we've been on the tour the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It was during those first 2 years that I realized how many artists there are out here. They're very quiet, and they don't make a big fuss, but they do a wonderful job, and I think part of it is because they aren't criticized as much. You're really allowed a lot of freedom doing artwork out here, so that's one of the advantages of being out here. One of your questions is, do you feel isolated or lonely here? Well, there's no reason for that if you get out and you volunteer. Everybody needs a volunteer. What I did was volunteer at the 29 Palms Art Gallery, and I've been a member there for over 26 years. That kept me very busy in the first years that I was here in retirement. I was on the board several years, and then I docented a lot. I think that kind of volunteer is very important. You meet very generous volunteers, and also a lot of them knew so much history about 29 Palms that it educated me. Plus you get that advantage of meeting people from all over the world. They're on their way into the park, and they stop by the gallery, and sometimes they spoke English, sometimes they didn't, but it was extremely interesting, so that was an advantage. So then I became involved here in the city, and I had forgotten all about this until I started to do the research for your program. I don't know if you're familiar with Kenny's Drugstore is really the center of 29 Palms, and it was divided up, and when they sold it, they divided it up into smaller places. So one of the sections of the drugstore became Jimmy the Greek's restaurant.
Oh, like
And-
Jimmy the Greek?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was really Jim Ketis. That's why it was named that. And he asked that a mural be painted inside
neat.
on the wall from one end, from the kitchen all the way to the street. So this is a picture of the mural. He wanted Mr. and Mrs. Ed and Margaret Kenny to be in the Model T with my uncle.
Oh,
So
neat.
here they are driving through the Indian Cove area.
Right.
And
No
there's
houses.
Right. That's correct.
I don't see
There
any
was
houses.
actually, when he came, when he built, it was only his house and Joe Stalter. They were the only two here.
Wow. And that's on the stretch of from Lear Avenue at 62 to Indian Cove.
And Joe Stalter was a little further on, maybe a block or so on the other side of Indian Cove.
Interesting.
But those were the only two.
Yeah.
But what happened is when Jimmy sold that, it became an Italian restaurant, I believe. And so the owner of the property said, don't destroy the murals. He asked that they put wallboard over because they wanted to put something of their own.
So they're still under there.
Yes. So the wallboard is up there, and then they painted an Italian scene, I believe, on top of it.
Oh, my goodness.
So someday, when they tear this apart, they're going to find this.
Oh, my goodness.
And wonder, where did this come from?
Yes.
So
that's
you're
great.
you're in on the secret.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was one. To try and show you a little bit of involvement in the community, which is so important.
Yeah.
And then the owner of that, he became the owner of Kenny's Drugstore, was Mr. Crowell. And he asked me if I would paint 8 large pictures. They were to go around his swimming pool area, which is out on 2 Mile.
Oh, so does he have a wall?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's all enclosed.
Okay.
And so these are some of the pictures that I painted for him. They're very large canvases.
They're beautiful.
And after a couple of years, he realized that they would be damaged because they were partially outside. And he put them in the corridor, which is the old Kenny's Drugstore.
Oh.
So those paintings in there, that's where he put these
Okay.
paintings. I believe they were there the last time I looked. I
Oh.
don't know if they're still there or not.
Yeah, not sure.
No, okay. Don't know where they went. This is way back in the 1930s. We took a picture of the man who built or dug down underneath the giant rock.
Right, Frank Kreitzer.
Yes. I looked it up yesterday and I couldn't find his name. That's the one. So he's standing right here.
Oh, my goodness.
And my father was up on a rock taking a picture of this. So the giant rock is right here.
So people were aware that he was doing this out there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, when we went out, and then we would invite him to a lunch. You can see us sitting here, and I'm the little girl sitting at the bench right here.
Oh, my goodness.
And he would tell us about the movie stars that would come out. So Amos and Andy had just been out there, and they would stay overnight with him underneath the giant rock.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so he had quite a list of these famous people. That was quite an adventure for them. Anyway, that was one thing
How
I had
interesting.
forgotten to
Yeah.
mention. So we went there a couple of times.
Speaking of him, just to round up on Frank, so for anyone listening who's not familiar, the story goes that they thought he was a spy,
Right.
And then they sent out some kind of federal agents to capture him, and he wouldn't be captured, and blew up the place, and that was the end of Frank Kreitzer.
And I think unfortunately, one of the officers who was there at the entrance to the rock was deafened by that explosion.
Yeah.
Yes. He had a jacket on with the explosives and just blew himself up.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. It was a very
Wow.
sad story.
Yeah.
What they were looking at was the fact that there was a very long trail all the way up the side of the mountain, and they thought that there was a long-range radio. And of course, there had been some German prisoners that had escaped, and so this is really part of the story. That
Oh, interesting.
They were looking for him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's where that ended. So when I retired, I had a friend that I had known for 30 years, and she was very much interested in the desert, and she used to work on weekends down at Jimmy the Greek and also at the Plaza Market when when Jim Kiedis had owned that. And so we both had a love of the desert. We were retired, so we decided we would come out here and try and build a home that we could use for a retirement place. So we put our money together, our retirement money,
Nice.
and built that house. It's over there. And unfortunately, she died of Parkinson's about 20 years. She had 20 years of enjoying the retirement home. But that's the reason why I could have came to build that house.
So when you came out when you were younger to visit your uncle, you found a friend that was your age to find the rocks. That was your activity.
Oh, yes.
But did you have any feeling about the place? Were you always excited to come out, or were you initially like, oh yeah, we're going to see Uncle Bob in the desert?
Well, I always looked forward to seeing the stars at night. Yes, but it was a lonely place, yes. And so, yes, even when I decided to retire, I had to think long and hard about this because I could have gone to any place. And I thought, no, this is the place. Interesting enough, it's sticking out of that. I read practically all of the artist statements that are in there to try and answer this question, like how do you
art tour catalog?
Yes, how you feel about the desert, and the same words keep coming up all the way through the tour catalog.
Yes,
it's quiet, isolation. You have this huge space out here, and I'm really spoiled. I'm going to have a hard time trying to go back, even for assisted living, to be back in town. It won't be my choice. But anyway, the intense light, I noticed the color, the texture they kept mentioning, the unique landscape, dramatic landscape, some people used. One of the words keeps coming up is simplicity. We had a condo on Maui, and I used to drag all my art supplies over there, and then I wouldn't paint anything because it was overwhelming. It was so beautiful. But I couldn't wait to get back here to the simple desert where one cactus flower is gorgeous, and I could handle that. I could paint that. Right. So that word simplicity is important for the desert. Peace and joy, they kept mentioning that. And of course, spaciousness and vastness and discarded objects.
Oh, yes. Fortunately
very
or
important,
unfortunately, right?
Very important to the desert.
Yes.
So, found objects and discarded objects. And one artist had put it just this way: the patterns that nature provides in the desert is wonderful.
I love that you did that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
So it covers a few things.
Yeah, totally. But and all of the things, that we all love that live out here. So thanks for doing that. That's really cool.
Well, the other thing was, how do you spend your time now? Because I'm too old to docent anymore. But I look out the window and I see these wonderful things happening. So I'm able to paint and draw what's around the studio.
Yeah, and it's all beautiful. Your work is beautiful. So if people want to see your work, they can go to Ann Lear, that's Ann with an E, AnnLearArtist.com.
That's correct.
Is that right?
That's
Okay,
right.
Great. Well, I want to thank you very much for being here today and sharing all that information with me. But before I let you go, I'm going to have you pick 2 little chips from the magic jar of the Diary Unlocked portion of the podcast. This is where you will answer 4 random questions that you're pulling out the numbers for right now. And Patreon supporters of the podcast will hear your answers to these questions. So if you're listening and you want to hear the answers that Ann has to the following questions, go out to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to be a patron of the podcast. The best thing I ate this week was: what's one of the scariest things you've ever done? What are a few things you're really grateful for?
You think I'm going to remember these questions?
I'm going to repeat them back.
Okay.
And what is something, this is perfect, what is something that was better back then than it is now? So if you are listening, and again, if you want to hear Ann's answers to those questions, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and become a patron of the podcast. Ann Lear, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity to tell my story.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I have a shout out this week to Barbara G. Thank you so much for your generous donation to the podcast, Barbara. I appreciate you. This podcast is funded through the generosity of listeners like Barbara and you. If you'd like to learn how you can chip in, visit the website desertladydiaries.com and click on the support page. You can become a monthly patron of the podcast and receive exclusive content in appreciation of your patronage, or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal using your debit or credit card, and you don't even have to be a PayPal member. You can also support without spending a dime. Follow the podcast on Facebook or Instagram, subscribe on one of the listening platforms, or share your favorite episode on social media. Thanks so much for listening.